My brother's best friend needed a fake boyfriend for the founders' gala. Everyone watched him choose me. Welcome, everyone. Before we dive into today's unforgettable story, I have one small favor to ask. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our future videos. It only takes a second, it is completely free, and it is one of the best ways to support us as we continue sharing heartfelt, emotional, and unforgettable stories like this one. Your support truly means more than you know. Before we begin, let us know where you are watching from today by leaving your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much for being here. Now, let us return to our main character. The hardest choices in life are often the ones that begin with a single impossible question. Noah Whitmore had always believed that loving someone in silence was safer than risking the friendship that kept them in his life. For nearly 8 years, that belief had guided every smile, every family barbecue, every holiday gathering, and every casual conversation he shared with Adrian Hayes, the man who happened to be his older brother Owen's closest friend. Adrian was 6 years older, confident without arrogance, successful without showing off, and somehow capable of making every person around him feel like they mattered. Noah had long accepted that admiration was all he would ever have. He buried his feelings beneath a career he genuinely loved, working as a museum education coordinator in Boston, where his days were spent introducing children to history, encouraging curiosity, and reminding young visitors that every great story began with ordinary people making extraordinary decisions. It was a peaceful life, one that gave him purpose, even if it occasionally reminded him that he had become very good at helping others discover dreams while quietly setting aside one of his own. On a cool Thursday evening in early spring, Noah drove across town to his brother's townhouse for what he assumed would be another relaxed family dinner. Owen had insisted everyone come because Adrian had recently returned from a week of investor meetings in California, and apparently there was finally an evening when everyone's schedules aligned. Noah almost declined. He had spent the entire afternoon preparing an educational exhibit about American innovation, and all he wanted was takeout and a quiet movie. Yet he knew Owen would never stop texting if he stayed home. So he arrived carrying a homemade apple pie and the familiar determination to keep his emotions carefully hidden. The evening unfolded exactly as expected. Owen teased everyone equally. Laughter filled the dining room. Adrian listened more than he spoke, occasionally sharing stories about his growing technology company and the preparations for the upcoming Founders Gala, one of Boston's most prestigious charity events attended by entrepreneurs, donors, civic leaders, and community partners. Noah noticed the faint tiredness behind Adrian's calm smile, something most people probably missed. Success looked effortless from the outside, but Noah had learned years ago that the strongest people often carried invisible pressure. As dinner ended and everyone drifted toward dessert, Adrian unexpectedly looked across the room. "Noah, do you have a minute?" he asked. The words were simple, yet Noah felt his heartbeat stumble. Owen barely looked up from slicing pie. "Don't let him talk you into investing in another startup," he joked, earning a quiet laugh from everyone. Adrian smiled politely but said nothing. Instead, he led Noah onto the back patio where the cool evening air replaced the warmth of the crowded house. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Streetlights reflected softly across the quiet neighborhood, while distant city sounds faded into the background. Adrian rested his hands against the porch railing and released a slow breath that sounded heavier than anything Noah had heard from him before. "I'm about to ask you something unusual," Adrian finally admitted, his voice steady but unusually careful. "You can say no, and nothing between us changes." Noah nodded, trying not to reveal how nervous he suddenly felt. Adrian turned toward him with an expression that mixed sincerity, vulnerability, and trust in a way Noah had never seen before. "I need someone to be my boyfriend for one night," he said quietly. "The Founders Gala is next Saturday, and you're the only person I trust enough to ask." Noah stared at Adrian, convinced he had misunderstood what he had just heard. Of every possibility he had imagined during those silent moments on the patio, this had never crossed his mind. His first instinct was to laugh, not because the request was funny, but because it felt too unreal to belong in the ordinary life he knew. Adrian, however, did not smile. His expression remained calm, sincere, and unexpectedly vulnerable. "I know it sounds strange," Adrian said. "Believe me, I have replayed this conversation in my head for days." Noah folded his arms, more to steady himself than to appear relaxed. "Why me?" he asked quietly. Adrian looked toward the dark street before answering. "Because everyone else would make it feel like a performance. With you, I know I can be myself." Those words settled heavily in Noah's heart. He had spent years wishing Adrian would simply notice him. Now Adrian was telling him that among everyone in his life, he trusted Noah the most. That thought alone made it difficult to think clearly. Adrian continued before Noah could respond. He explained that the Founders Gala had become more than a charity event. Investors, nonprofit leaders, business partners, and influential families would all be there. For months, people had speculated about Adrian's personal life, trying to pair him with individuals whose families offered business advantages. Adrian had grown tired of conversations that treated relationships like strategic partnerships instead of genuine human connections. "I do not want another evening answering questions about who I should date," Adrian admitted. "I want one night where I can focus on supporting the Museum Education Foundation we are sponsoring instead of becoming everyone's favorite topic." Noah listened carefully. "And pretending to date someone solves that?" Adrian gave a small smile. "Maybe not forever, but it gives me one evening without endless introductions arranged by other people." Noah leaned against the railing, considering everything. The request was temporary. One evening, one carefully planned appearance. Then life would return to normal. At least that was what logic suggested. His heart quietly disagreed. "What exactly would we have to do?" Noah finally asked. Adrian's shoulders relaxed for the first time since they stepped outside. "Attend together. Arrive together. Stay together. We should know enough about each other's daily routines that nothing sounds rehearsed if people ask questions. Nothing dramatic. Just believable." Noah laughed softly. "That sounds easier said than done." Adrian nodded. "Which is why I hoped we could meet a few times this week. Dinner, coffee, maybe walk through the museum where you work. We already know each other, but we have never really talked about ourselves." That sentence lingered in the air. Noah realized Adrian was right. They had spent years in the same rooms, yet almost always through the lens of Owen's friendship. They knew facts about each other but very little about the quiet details that shaped everyday life. Before Noah answered, the patio door opened and Owen stepped outside carrying 2 slices of apple pie. "I figured negotiations required dessert," he joked. Neither man corrected him. Adrian accepted a plate while Noah tried not to smile too obviously. Owen looked between them with playful curiosity. "Whatever this mysterious conversation is about, I hope it is good news." Adrian met Noah's eyes for a brief second before replying. "I think it might be." Noah felt something shift inside him. He still had every reason to decline. Protecting his own heart would certainly be the safer decision. Yet as he watched Adrian standing beneath the porch light with a hopeful expression he had never seen before, Noah heard himself say the one word that would quietly change both of their lives. Yes. The next few days unfolded in ways neither Noah nor Adrian could have predicted. What began as practical planning slowly transformed into conversations that felt surprisingly natural. On Monday evening, they met at a quiet coffee shop near Boston Common, agreeing that if they were going to convince hundreds of guests they were a couple, they should at least know the ordinary. Details people often shared without thinking. They talked about favorite restaurants, childhood memories, weekend routines, and the small habits that made each of them smile. Noah learned that Adrian still called his mother every Sunday afternoon, no matter how busy work became. Adrian discovered that Noah never entered the museum without stopping to greet the security guards by name, because he believed kindness was part of every visitor's experience. They laughed when they realized they both preferred rainy mornings over bright summer afternoons, because quieter days somehow encouraged better conversations. Nothing about the evening felt rehearsed. It felt comfortable. 2 nights later, Adrian arrived at the museum just before closing time. Most visitors had already left, leaving wide galleries filled with soft lighting and peaceful silence. Noah guided Adrian through an upcoming exhibit celebrating American inventors whose ideas had quietly changed everyday life. Instead of focusing on famous names, Noah became excited while explaining lesser-known educators, engineers, and community leaders whose dedication inspired future generations. Adrian watched him more than he watched the exhibits. Noah spoke with genuine enthusiasm, his eyes brightening every time he described how curiosity could transform a child's future. At one point, a young family recognized Noah from an earlier school program. A little girl ran over carrying a notebook and proudly showed him a drawing of an old steam locomotive she had created after visiting the museum months before. Noah knelt to compliment her work and encouraged her to keep asking questions about the world. After the family walked away, Adrian smiled quietly. "I understand now," he said. Noah looked confused. "Understand what?" Adrian folded his hands into his coat pockets. "Why everyone who knows you seems happier after spending time with you." Noah felt warmth spread across his face and quickly looked toward the nearest display case. He was far more comfortable encouraging children than accepting compliments himself. "You are giving me too much credit," he replied. Adrian gently shook his head. "No, I probably have not given you enough." The words lingered between them long after they continued walking. By Friday evening, they had practiced answering every question they imagined gala guests might ask. How did you meet? What did you admire about each other? What was your favorite weekend activity together? They agreed to answer honestly whenever possible because truth required far less effort than memorizing invented stories. The only difference was that they would present those truths through the lens of a relationship that technically did not yet exist. As they left the museum, light rain began falling across the city. Adrian instinctively opened an umbrella and stepped closer so they could both stay dry during the short walk to the parking garage. Their shoulders brushed for only a brief moment, yet neither moved away. The comfortable silence that followed somehow said more than another conversation could have. When they finally reached their cars, Adrian smiled before getting inside. "Tomorrow night will probably be complicated," he admitted. Noah returned the smile without hesitation. "Then I am glad we are walking into it together." Neither of them noticed that what had started as preparation no longer felt like acting at all. Saturday evening arrived with clear skies over Boston, and the grand entrance of the Founders Gala shimmered beneath warm lights as black cars steadily pulled toward the historic hotel. Noah stood in front of the large mirror inside his apartment, adjusting the collar of his charcoal tuxedo for what felt like the 10th time. He reminded himself that this was only one evening, one agreement between two people who trusted each other. Still, his heartbeat refused to settle. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed with a simple message from Adrian. "I am outside whenever you are ready." Noah stepped onto the sidewalk and immediately found Adrian waiting beside a sleek black sedan. Dressed in a perfectly tailored navy tuxedo, Adrian looked composed as always. Yet when he saw Noah approaching, an unmistakably genuine smile appeared on his face. "You look incredible," Adrian said without hesitation. Noah felt himself blush despite the cool evening air. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." Adrian laughed softly before opening the passenger door. During the drive downtown, they talked about everything except the gala itself. They discussed a new museum exhibit, Owen's latest attempt to master homemade pizza, and whether Boston would ever experience a spring without unpredictable weather. The ordinary conversation eased Noah's nerves more effectively than any reassurance could have. When the hotel finally came into view, rows of photographers, guests, and volunteers lined the entrance. Elegant music drifted through the open doors, while charitable organizations welcomed supporters from across the city. Adrian turned off the engine but did not reach for the door immediately. Instead, he looked at Noah with quiet sincerity. "One last chance to change your mind." Noah smiled calmly. "If I wanted to leave, I would have done it yesterday." Adrian nodded with visible appreciation before stepping out of the car. As they walked toward the entrance together, Adrian naturally offered his hand. Noah hesitated for only a heartbeat before accepting it. The simple gesture felt surprisingly effortless. Cameras flashed as guests arrived, but neither of them paid much attention. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers reflected warm golden light across polished marble floors, while conversations filled the elegant space with quiet energy. Adrian greeted business partners, nonprofit directors, and longtime supporters with the same respectful warmth Noah had always admired. What surprised Noah most was how naturally Adrian introduced him. "This is Noah Whitmore," Adrian said proudly to each new person. "He is the museum education coordinator I told you about." There was never hesitation in Adrian's voice, never uncertainty, only quiet confidence. As the evening continued, Noah found himself speaking with educators, donors, artists, and community leaders who were genuinely interested in expanding educational opportunities for local children. His passion for museum outreach quickly became the center of several conversations. Rather than feeling like an outsider attending an unfamiliar social event, Noah realized people valued his perspective. Across the ballroom, Adrian occasionally glanced toward him, and each time their eyes met, they exchanged an easy smile that no longer required practice. Later, while Noah discussed educational programs with a local foundation director, a graceful woman approached carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. "You must be Noah," she said warmly. "I am Emily Carter." Noah recognized the name immediately. Emily belonged to one of Boston's most influential philanthropic families and had known Adrian for years. She studied Noah for a brief moment before smiling even wider. "It is wonderful to finally meet the person Adrian has been talking about for much longer than you probably realize." Noah's expression froze ever so slightly as Emily's unexpected words settled into the quiet space between them. While only a few feet away, Adrian turned toward their conversation, realizing exactly what she had just revealed. Noah blinked in surprise, searching Emily Carter's face to see whether she was joking, but her warm expression carried only genuine amusement. Before he could respond, Adrian walked over with the composed confidence that had carried him through countless board meetings, though Noah noticed the faint uncertainty hidden behind his eyes. Emily looked at Adrian and laughed softly. "I suppose I finally said it out loud." Adrian smiled with quiet resignation. "Apparently you did." Noah looked from one of them to the other. "I feel like I missed several chapters of this story." Emily shook her head. "Not really. You simply were not in the rooms where your name kept coming up." Noah frowned slightly. "My name?" Emily nodded. "Every time our foundation discussed education initiatives, museum partnerships, or community outreach, Adrian would somehow mention a museum coordinator who had remarkable ideas. Whenever someone asked how to make programs more welcoming for children, he already had an example ready. Whenever we talked about authentic leadership, he would tell another story about someone who cared more about people than recognition. Noah turned toward Adrian, who suddenly seemed much more interested in the ballroom decorations than the conversation itself. "You never told me any of that," Noah said quietly. Adrian finally met his eyes. "It never seemed important to mention." Emily smiled knowingly. "It looked important to the rest of us." Before Noah could process everything she had revealed, another couple approached the group. Richard Carter, the respected chairman of the Carter Foundation, greeted Adrian with a firm handshake, followed by his wife Charlotte, whose calm presence immediately put everyone around her at ease. Richard welcomed Noah politely and congratulated Adrian on supporting educational partnerships instead of focusing only on business expansion. Charlotte turned toward Noah with genuine curiosity rather than polite obligation. "Adrian has spoken very highly of museum education," she said. "I was hoping I would finally meet the person inspiring those conversations." Noah felt another wave of disbelief. For years, he had assumed Adrian barely noticed his work beyond casual family conversations. Yet standing in the middle of one of Boston's most influential charity events, he was discovering that Adrian had quietly carried those conversations into boardrooms and foundation meetings where Noah had never imagined his name would be mentioned. As the evening continued, Richard invited Noah to describe one of his museum programs for underserved schools. Noah spoke naturally about making history approachable, encouraging children to ask questions, and creating opportunities for families who had never visited museums before. He expected polite interest. Instead, Everyone listened attentively. Several guests asked thoughtful questions while others exchanged business cards with museum representatives nearby. Adrian remained beside him without interrupting, watching with unmistakable pride as Noah described ideas that mattered deeply to him. After the discussion ended, Richard smiled warmly. Communities become stronger when education feels personal instead of distant. Thank you for reminding all of us why these partnerships matter. Charlotte agreed with a gentle nod. Sometimes the most meaningful investments are not measured in quarterly reports but in curious young minds. As they walked away to greet other guests, Noah looked at Adrian in quiet amazement. Did you really recommend our museum programs during those meetings? Adrian answered without hesitation. Every chance I had. Noah searched his face. Why? Adrian smiled, his voice calm and sincere. Because good ideas deserve to be heard, even when the people behind them are too humble to promote themselves. Noah felt his carefully protected emotions becoming harder to hide. The arrangement they had created for one evening suddenly seemed far more complicated than either of them had planned, because with every honest conversation and every unexpected revelation, the line between pretending to care and quietly falling even deeper into something real was beginning to disappear. The orchestra's gentle melody gradually faded as the master of ceremonies welcomed everyone to the highlight of the evening. Conversations softened across the ballroom while guests found their seats beneath sparkling chandeliers. Adrian glanced toward Noah with a reassuring smile before walking onto the stage to deliver the keynote address that everyone had been anticipating. Noah watched from a nearby table, reminding himself that he had seen Adrian speak before in interviews and conferences. Yet somehow this evening felt different. Adrian stood behind the podium without the polished distance that usually accompanied public appearances. He looked across the room with quiet gratitude before beginning. When people talk about success, Adrian said, they usually focus on numbers, awards, or achievements. Those things certainly matter, but they have never answered the most important question. Who helped us become the people we are? The audience listened attentively. Adrian continued by thanking employees, community partners, educators, volunteers, and nonprofit organizations that had chosen cooperation over competition. Instead of celebrating individual accomplishments, he spoke about the lasting impact of ordinary people who quietly improved the lives of others without expecting recognition. Noah found himself smiling because the message sounded remarkably similar to the conversations they had shared earlier that week. Adrian paused briefly before continuing in a more personal tone. Several years ago, I met someone who reminded me that meaningful leadership begins with listening. Every conversation with that person challenged me to think beyond quarterly goals and business growth. I began paying closer attention to the communities around me, especially children whose futures depend on adults willing to invest in curiosity rather than convenience. Noah slowly realized the room had become almost completely silent. Although Adrian had not mentioned any names, the direction of his words felt unmistakable. Adrian looked toward the museum representatives seated nearby before speaking again. That perspective changed the way our company approaches philanthropy. We stopped asking what recognition our donations would bring and started asking whose lives those opportunities might quietly transform. Warm applause spread through the ballroom before gradually settling once more. Adrian smiled appreciatively but did not step away from the podium. Instead, he rested both hands lightly against its sides, as though preparing to share something that mattered even more. There is another lesson I have learned, he said. Sometimes we spend so much energy meeting expectations that we forget to ask ourselves whether those expectations truly belong to us. Several guests exchanged thoughtful glances. Adrian's voice remained calm and steady. For a long time, I believed success required carefully managing every part of my public life. Eventually, I realized that genuine respect cannot grow from pretending to be someone you are not. It grows when honesty becomes more valuable than approval. Noah felt his heartbeat quicken. Adrian turned his eyes toward him for only a brief moment before continuing. This evening I arrived with someone who reminds me every day that kindness is never wasted, humility is never weakness, and authentic character deserves to be celebrated. Whether in a museum classroom or an ordinary conversation, That person inspires people simply by believing they matter. Noah lowered his eyes, overwhelmed by emotions he had spent years trying to control. The applause that followed felt warmer than before, not because Adrian had made a dramatic announcement, but because his words carried unmistakable sincerity. As Adrian stepped away from the podium and returned across the ballroom, several guests greeted him with respectful smiles instead of curious questions. When he reached Noah, neither of them spoke immediately. Adrian simply looked at him with quiet honesty before saying, "I am tired of pretending that the most important parts of my life should remain unspoken." Noah realized that somewhere between their first cup of coffee and this unforgettable evening, the agreement they had created had quietly become something neither of them wanted to end. The applause slowly faded into the gentle rhythm of the orchestra as guests returned to their conversations. Yet Noah barely noticed the elegant ballroom around him. Adrian's words continued echoing in his mind with every heartbeat. They had agreed to perform a role for one evening, but nothing Adrian had said on that stage sounded rehearsed. It sounded personal, sounded real. For the next hour, they moved naturally through the remaining receptions, greeting guests who now seemed less interested in speculation and more interested in genuine conversation. Several nonprofit directors thanked Noah for sharing ideas about museum education, while local business leaders expressed interest in supporting new learning programs for children across Massachusetts. Adrian quietly stepped back whenever Noah spoke, allowing him to receive the attention without interruption. More than once Noah caught Adrian watching him with the same proud expression he had noticed earlier at the museum. It was not admiration born from obligation. It was something quieter and infinitely more meaningful. Eventually the evening reached its conclusion. Guests slowly filtered toward the exits, saying their goodbyes beneath the sparkling chandeliers that had illuminated the celebration all night. Adrian accepted one final handshake before turning toward Noah. "Would you like to get some fresh air before I drive you home?" he asked. Noah nodded without hesitation. They slipped through the hotel's side entrance into a peaceful courtyard overlooking the city. The spring night was cool but comfortable, carrying the faint scent of blooming trees from a nearby garden. The sounds of traffic seemed distant compared to the quiet that settled between them. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Neither seemed eager to break the silence that somehow felt more honest than words. Finally, Noah smiled softly. "I guess our performance is officially over." Adrian looked at him thoughtfully. "Is that what tonight felt like to you?" Noah hesitated. "It started that way." Adrian slowly nodded, as though he had expected that answer. Noah took a slow breath before continuing. "When you first asked me to come with you, I kept telling myself not to read too much into any of it. I reminded myself it was temporary. One evening. One agreement. I thought if I stayed realistic, I could protect myself." Adrian listened without interrupting. "Then Emily told me you had been talking about me for years. Richard and Charlotte already knew about my work before we even met. You spoke about my museum programs in rooms I never entered. None of that was part of our arrangement." Adrian looked down briefly before answering. "No, it was not." Noah gave a quiet laugh filled with disbelief. "Do you know what the hardest part is?" Adrian gently shook his head. "I spent years believing I was the only one carrying feelings I could never talk about." Adrian's expression changed almost instantly. Surprise gave way to understanding, followed by an unmistakable warmth that reached his eyes. "Years?" he asked softly. Noah smiled with quiet embarrassment. "Long enough that I stopped counting. You were my brother's best friend. You always seemed completely out of reach. I convinced myself admiring you from a distance was enough because I never expected anything else." Adrian released a slow breath and stepped a little closer, leaving only a comfortable space between them. "Noah," he said gently, "if I tell you something now, I need you to believe I am telling the truth." Noah met his eyes without looking away. Adrian smiled with the same quiet sincerity that had first convinced Noah to accept the impossible invitation. "I did not ask you because you were the safest choice. I asked because somewhere along the way, you became the only person I wanted standing beside me, and I finally realized I did not want this evening to end with us pretending anymore." Noah felt the tension he had carried for years dissolve into a quiet sense of peace. He looked at Adrian for a long moment, searching for even the smallest sign of uncertainty, but all he found was honesty. The carefully rehearsed story they had created for one evening had quietly become unnecessary. Noah smiled, the kind of smile that came only after someone had spent too long hiding behind caution. "Then let us stop pretending," he said softly. Adrian laughed with visible relief, and for the first time that evening neither of them felt the need to explain anything further. Some moments did not require perfect words because the truth had already been spoken. They left the hotel together just as they had arrived, but everything felt different. The city lights reflected across the Charles River, while the cool spring breeze carried away the pressure that had followed Adrian for months. During the drive home, they talked less about the gala and more about the future. There were no dramatic promises or impossible plans. Instead, they discussed ordinary things that suddenly felt extraordinary. They wondered which restaurant they should finally try after hearing Owen recommend it for years. They laughed about taking a weekend trip to Cape Cod once the museum finished its busy summer season. Adrian admitted he had always wanted to spend an entire afternoon walking through the galleries with Noah instead of rushing between meetings. Noah confessed that he had imagined doing exactly that more times than he could remember. Over the following weeks, life settled into a comfortable rhythm that neither of them had expected. Adrian remained busy leading his company, but he became more intentional about protecting time outside the office. He stopped measuring every day by completed meetings and financial reports. Instead, he found satisfaction in sharing breakfast with Noah before work or meeting him after museum programs simply to hear how the children had responded to a new exhibit. Noah noticed the change immediately. Adrian smiled more often, laughed more easily, and no longer carried the invisible weight that had once followed him into every room. At the museum, exciting opportunities also began to appear. Inspired by conversations from the gala, several local foundations partnered with Noah's team to expand educational programs throughout Greater Boston. Schools that previously struggled to organize museum visits could now participate through new community grants. Watching buses filled with excited children arrive each week reminded Noah that one sincere conversation could create opportunities far beyond what anyone expected. Adrian quietly supported every project without seeking recognition. Whenever reporters praised his company's generosity, he redirected the attention toward educators, volunteers, and families whose commitment made the program successful. Owen eventually noticed the growing closeness between his younger brother and his lifelong friend. One Sunday afternoon, he looked at both of them across the family dinner table before shaking his head with an amused smile. "I cannot believe it took the two smartest people I know this long to figure it out." The entire table burst into laughter, including Adrian and Noah, who exchanged an embarrassed glance before smiling at each other again. Months passed, and their relationship became defined not by grand public moments but by consistent acts of care. They celebrated professional successes together, encouraged one another through difficult days, and discovered that happiness often lived inside ordinary routines rather than extraordinary events. One bright Saturday morning, Adrian invited Noah to meet him at the museum before opening hours, explaining only that he wanted to show him something special in the sculpture garden behind the building. Noah agreed without hesitation, unaware that while their shared future had already begun, Adrian had quietly spent weeks preparing one final surprise that would transform an already beautiful story into the beginning of a lifelong promise. The morning sun filtered gently through the budding trees, surrounding the museum's sculpture garden, filling the quiet paths with soft golden light that seemed to celebrate the arrival of another beautiful spring day. Noah smiled as he walked through the familiar entrance, expecting Adrian to be waiting near one of the contemporary sculptures they both admired. Instead, he found Adrian standing beside a simple stone bench overlooking the garden where colorful flowers had begun to bloom. There were no photographers, no business executives, no formal audience, and no grand stage. It was only the two of them, exactly as Noah would have wanted. Adrian smiled the moment he saw Noah approaching. "Thank you for coming," he said warmly. Noah laughed. "You made it sound like another mysterious meeting. I could not say no after everything that happened." Adrian nodded, his expression calm but thoughtful. That first impossible question changed both of our lives. I think this one will too. They began walking slowly along the winding garden path, passing sculptures that Noah had admired for years, while sharing stories with museum visitors. Adrian stopped occasionally to ask about a particular artist or the inspiration behind a piece, listening with the same genuine curiosity that had first captured Noah's heart. Eventually they reached a quiet corner surrounded by flowering trees where the sounds of the city seemed to disappear completely. Adrian turned toward Noah with a smile filled not with nervousness but with certainty. "You know," he said softly, "when I asked you to be my date for one evening, I believed I was solving a temporary problem. What I did not realize was that I was finally giving myself permission to stop hiding from the future I actually wanted." Noah felt emotion quietly rise inside him as Adrian continued. "You never tried to impress me with status, money, or ambition. You reminded me that success means very little if it cannot improve someone else's life. Watching you encourage children to stay curious, seeing how people naturally trust you, and realizing how peaceful I feel whenever we are together completely changed the way I measure happiness." Adrian reached into his jacket pocket and carefully removed a small ring box. Noah looked at it in astonishment, his eyes filling with joyful disbelief before Adrian had even opened it. Adrian smiled gently. "Noah Whitmore, every meaningful decision I have made over the past year has led me here. I do not want another gala, another speech, or another milestone without you beside me. Will you marry me and continue building this life with me, one ordinary day at a time?" Noah laughed through happy tears, covering his smile for a brief moment before looking directly into Adrian's eyes. "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "I would have said yes the moment I realized you were no longer asking me to pretend." Adrian placed the ring on Noah's finger as both of them laughed with the quiet relief of two people who had finally stopped hiding from their own hearts. At that exact moment Owen stepped into the garden with Emily, Richard, Charlotte, several museum colleagues, and a handful of close family members who had quietly waited nearby after helping Adrian organize the surprise. Warm applause filled the peaceful garden as everyone gathered to congratulate them. Owen wrapped both men in a proud embrace before smiling at his younger brother. "I always hoped the two people I cared about most would eventually find the courage to tell the truth." Months later, the museum unveiled its largest educational expansion in partnership with Adrian's Foundation, creating opportunities for thousands of children to discover history through curiosity instead of circumstance. Whenever people asked Noah and Adrian how their story began, they smiled at each other before admitting that the best chapters of life often begin with unexpected requests, honest conversations, and the courage to choose love over fear, because the greatest relationships are never built on perfect plans but on two hearts willing to become completely honest with one another.